So I'm an attorney with MidPenn Legal Services, and I've been doing this type of work for about 20 years now. And up until about a year and a half ago, these cases, when I handled them, they were mostly just about the reason why the person, I only help out workers. I should get that out in front right now. I've only ever represented people who were the workers, not the employer. So the extent that there's any bias in the way I present this information, that's why. But I tried to be as fair to the information as I could be. But with that being said, normally when in the past 18 and a half years prior to before the pandemic, we focused in these cases on why the worker lost their job and whether or not that reason was qualifying for unemployment compensation benefits. Now, everything has changed, since March of 2020, and now there's just a whole new host of issues. There's a whole host of issues and other concerns that have popped up relative to all the changes that were made in response to the pandemic. So here's what we're going to talk about this evening. We're going to start off by talking about just what traditional unemployment compensation, what that program was and is. Then we're going to transition into a little discussion about how the benefit programs that are available during the pandemic, how they operate. And then we're going to go into if you do have to contest one of these issues. Usually one of the first steps is a hearing before a referee. And so we'll talk about how they operate. And then we're going to focus on overpayments and some other side issues as well. And then we'll finish up with questions. Now, one thing I do want to make clear, which is I am a lawyer, but you guys aren't my clients. So by participating in this presentation, the intent is that we're just sharing general information with you. To be fair, the reason why I say that is it's not in your best interest to be talking about your private lives in a forum like this. I wouldn't want to be discussing my personal information over a Zoom chat with other people included that's being recorded. And also, as an attorney, it wouldn't be fair to ask me to answer a question based upon just limited information. Like if you were my client, I would bring you into the office. We would log into your portal together maybe, or you would print up the information that you would have. I'd review all your paperwork. It's really hard for a lawyer to just kind of give guesses as to what your best avenue of approach is for resolving your problem based upon a quick conversation. And you deserve better than that too. The last thing a lawyer wants to do is provide information to somebody or to the public that's inaccurate. And how we get inaccurate information into the public's hands is by basing it on partial information. And so that's why that little disclaimer is up there. It's to protect you and me and to make sure that you aren't misled as to what we're doing here or what steps, if any, you should take moving forward. That's not the intent of this presentation. So moving into regular unemployment compensation, you can apply for it on the department's website at uc.pa.gov, or they do have a 1-800 number, 1-888 number. You should apply for unemployment usually as quickly as you can after you lose a job for one reason or another. The earlier you apply, the earlier you will get benefits. Now, to be eligible for benefits, generally speaking, now there's a lot more than just these two issues, but the two most common hurdles you have to overcome are, first, the person has to be financially eligible, and secondly, they have to be unemployed through no fault of their own. And that's going to be important. That's kind of the guiding principles, one of the guiding principles of this whole program is that the unemployment, all these programs are based upon helping out employees who are out of work for reasons that are not their own fault. And you'll see that kind of theme pop up here as we go through this discussion. So let's talk about financial eligibility. I threw this chart up here basically just to illustrate that it's really challenging how they determine whether somebody is financially eligible. Essentially what the department does is, this is for just normal unemployment compensation cases, they look at your wages that you've earned, all right? But it's not the most current wages that you've earned. They have a 12-month period of time that they look at. And they pick that 12-month period of time based upon when you applied for your unemployment compensation benefits. They break the year down into 3-month increments, into quarters, as we call them. So January through March, and then June through April, September through July, and December through October. And what they do is they ignore the quarter of the year in which you filed your application for unemployment compensation benefits. And then they also ignore the quarter right before that. And so what you end up with is a 12-month period of time that they're looking at that may be like 18 months ago relative to when you filed your application for benefits. And those are the wages that were earned during that 12-month period that they're gonna use to analyze to determine whether or not somebody financially qualifies for unemployment compensation benefits. And then based upon those wages, that's how they calculate what your weekly benefit amount will be. So they have this algorithm, the calculations they use, and when they plug in all the information, that's what determines what, if any, unemployment compensation benefits you're financially eligible for. And if you are financially eligible, then great. They move on to the second step to see if the reason why you lost your job is qualifying. If you're not financially eligible, then they just send you a notice that says you are not financially eligible, and that's the end of it. You can challenge that determination. Like, this happens sometimes if the information that the department has is inaccurate, which does occur sometimes. Either the employer misreports wage information for the worker, or there's just inaccuracies for one reason or another, or maybe there's multiple employers and the department didn't consider a secondary employer into their calculations, and so the financial determination may be inaccurate for that reason. But generally speaking, that's how the financial eligibility element is determined. And then we get into, we look at what they call the separation, which is just a technical term for the reason why the person is no longer working. And although there's more reasons than just this, the three main reasons that we see is the person was discharged, that means they were fired, or they quit, or the worker was laid off. And each one of those reasons, it's important to figure out what that reason is. And sometimes it's unclear. There's plenty of cases where, towards the end of an employment relationship, where, especially if the relationship is deteriorating, where both sides are just yelling at each other, and it's not clear whether the worker walked off or whether the employer told him to get out. And so it can be a little bit unclear as to what happened. And also in situations involving like health reasons, where somebody's out of work for health reasons, and it's unclear whether the worker just didn't come back to work because they didn't want to, or the employer let them go because the employee couldn't come back to work because they needed to be home to attend to their own well-being. So sometimes there is some murkiness surrounding this issue of why the employment relationship ended. But it is important. It's important for this reason. If there is going to be a hearing or a legal aspect to legal review of this situation, in any legal case, it's really important to know who has what's called the burden of proof. Now, generally speaking, the burden of proof means which side has the job of proving something did or did not happen. And if all of you watch TV as much as I do, you're probably familiar with like the crime shows that are on TV, and because they're very popular. And we always hear about in a criminal case, it's the Commonwealth or the state's job to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. Technically, the defendant, the alleged perpetrator of the crime, doesn't have to do anything. They don't have to prove a thing. It's the Commonwealth or the state's job to prove that something did or did not happen. And in these cases, that burden of proof switches based upon the separation. So if the worker was fired, then it's the employer's job to essentially prove that they fired the worker for a really good reason, what they call in unemployment parlance, willful misconduct. That means that the Like, so for a rule violation, which is very common, the employer has a set of rules that employees are held to. Let's say like an attendance policy. Let's say it's, you miss 3 days in 90 days without a proper excuse. And the employer says that will lead to an automatic termination. Well, if the employee is aware of that and they miss more than 3 days in the 90-day period and they don't have an excuse, that will probably, if nothing else happened in a vacuum, that would constitute a reason for the department to find that they're not going to award benefits to that worker. And same thing with for voluntary quit, that burden of proof switches. So now the worker has to prove that they quit for a really good reason, what the department calls necessitous and compelling reasons. So it's the worker's job to prove, like, let's say they had transportation issues. It's not enough just to say, hey, I couldn't get into work because my car broke down and I can't make it into work. That's not going to be enough. So you have to be able to demonstrate that in addition to having this issue, you also tried to overcome it. You took all reasonable steps to try to make it work out anyway. So the rules are set up in such a way that, like in the transportation problem case, the worker would be expected to call up his boss and his or her boss and say, hey, I can't make it in. Do you know of anybody who travels along my route that can maybe pick me up and I can meet with them? It would be expected on the worker to explore their options through public transportation or other family members to help them out to get back and forth to work. And if they haven't done that, if all that they did was they said, oh, I woke up one day and my transmission blew out and now I can't get into work, so sorry, I guess I had to quit. That's fine, but it doesn't mean that that worker is going to be entitled to unemployment compensation benefits. It means that they're probably going to be denied unemployment compensation benefits. And if you're laid off, the expectation for those cases is the layoff is generally like a short, it's meant to be short term usually. We've had different experiences over the past year and a half or whatever it's been. But if you're laid off, then the expectation is that you would be returning to work. So if the employer calls you back to work, then the expectation is that the worker does return to work. But generally in between that time, they would be eligible for unemployment. So I'm going to just check the chat to see if any, Emily, if any questions popped up yet?
Nope, nothing yet. I think we're still good.
Some other eligibility considerations include there's a requirement that you're able and available for work each week that you're collecting unemployment compensation benefits. So that means that you're healthy enough to work. You're not just going on vacation down to South America for the entire time, because then you wouldn't have a connection to the workforce. That kind of dovetails into that second requirement that it's suspended right now, but normally with unemployment compensation benefits, there's a requirement that the worker, while they're on unemployment, that they're actually actively searching for work, and the department has ways of tracking that, and they have reporting requirements. But that's suspended until July 18th of this year. So the state's not requiring you to actively search for work. But you do have to be able and available for work, even now. So, for instance, if you're not healthy enough to be able to work, they're going to say, well, even though you're otherwise eligible, we're not going to pay you unemployment benefits. And the reason for that is that if you're not able and available for work, then maybe that worker should be exploring their alternatives through like Social Security disability or some program like that, which is meant to kind of compensate people who are not able to work because of their health. Self-employment, so this means, and this has been a sticky area here recently, been a lot of development in this area, especially around like the ride sharing opportunities like Uber and Lyft and some of those employment opportunities. So generally speaking, though, if you're self-employed, that means you have a job or not, you have a business that you run in addition to your former job. So think of like the cosmetic sales, they can be one, or folks who engage in the sale of like some of these Tupperware type containers, or they're running a business on the side. That can be something to be disqualifying. And the logic behind that being that, well, if you just did that more, then you would not need unemployment compensation benefits. So the department expects workers who have self-employment, generally speaking, to put more effort into that activity, and then they wouldn't need unemployment compensation benefits. Now, there is also a problem if, let's say, you're on unemployment compensation, you're doing your work search, and you're updating your resumes, you're filling out applications, and you're submitting your resume, and you do get a job offer, and you don't take that job for whatever reason. That's probably going to be an issue that's going to have to be addressed in order for you to remain eligible for unemployment compensation benefits. Generally speaking, the department, the way the rules are set up, they won't continue to pay people unemployment compensation benefits if they're turning down suitable employment. Now, for all of these issues that we've talked about up to this point, all these issues, there are appellate opportunities. And so the way it works is when you first apply, you're dealing with a service center, they're called. And oftentimes, maybe you'll talk to the person on the phone, maybe who's making the decision on your case. But oftentimes you may not talk to anyone. They just review paperwork that's been submitted by the employer and by the worker, and they make a decision based upon that. They will mail out the determination. They give you 15 days if you want to, if you disagree with the decision, to appeal it. If no appeal is filed, then that decision becomes final. And they do take deadlines very, 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 very seriously. If you don't meet that 15-day deadline, that can be a reason for your appeal not to be considered at all. So if you're in that situation, be very wary of your deadlines. But if you do file an appeal and it is timely, then they're going to schedule you for a hearing before a referee, they're called. And these are kind of like judges who only hear these types of cases. So it's not a county level case or a federal case. These are what we call administrative hearings. And what's interesting about these hearings is that throughout the entire process, if you appealed all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, the last step in this process, this would be the referee's hearing is your only opportunity to submit evidence and testimony. So have witnesses speak on your behalf about the reason why your unemployment benefits should be granted or should be denied. This is the only time that you get to do that, is at that referee's hearing. All the appeals after that are just a review of what happened at the referee's hearing. And so the referee's hearings are very, very important for that reason.
Nick, we did have a question come up in chat that I would like to address really quickly if you think
Sure.
we can get to it quickly. The comment is, I have a question. I filed for PUA first, but was told I need a denial from UC, so I have 2 claims open, but I cannot get a PIN for UC, and I guess I need to delete the PUA claim as well. And I can never get someone on the phone, so can someone lead me in the right direction because I need help?
Yeah, so that's a really, really common issue. The messaging on this early on last year was not the best. And in the department's defense, when I say the department, I mean the Department of Labor and Industry. They were in the process of updating their whole computer system prior to the pandemic hitting last year. They were just about to finally update this outdated system, and then the pandemic hits, and they get bombarded with just millions of claims, and the old system couldn't deal with normally I think they get about 40,000 claims a year, and now they're getting millions of claims all in one year, and it just wasn't set up for that. And so they had real issues on their end, and none of this was intentionally, none of the steps that they took was intended to harm claimants in any way, but it did make it frustrating, and it continues to be frustrating. But we're talking now about the COVID-19 program. So for those of you who don't know, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, PUA, is available for workers who aren't like what we call traditional employees. So they don't work directly for an employer, and they draw a paycheck in exchange for their services that they provide. So these are going to be people like independent contractors, which include barber shops oftentimes, where a barber will rent a chair, but they're bringing their own equipment, they're cutting hair at their own schedule. That's like an independent contractor, or like in the construction business, you see a lot of independent contractors. There's a lot of gig workers, people who work either part-time, like working directly for somebody, but they're not like a traditional employee, so they're paid differently. Those people generally in non-pandemic times would not be eligible for unemployment compensation benefits. And so I think when the pandemic initially hit, there were a lot of workers who thought, well, this must apply to me because I'm affected by the pandemic. I should apply for PUA. And unfortunately, that was the wrong analysis. What you're supposed to do is apply for unemployment first. If you're denied for unemployment because they say, you're an independent contractor, so you don't qualify for UC, or for some other reason, once you get that denial notice, then the expectation was at that point that worker would then apply for PUA. But we've had a lot of people who made a decision that either they didn't get that message for one reason or another, or they thought that pandemic PUA applied to them more specifically, so they applied for that first. And so as they discovered, that caused problems for them. Now, generally speaking, and I know it's really hard to get through to anybody unemployment right now to get any kind of answers. And again, they've plussed up their staff. They've thrown a lot of staff hours at trying to deal with that. It's just that there's just so much there's so many people who need answers, and they just don't have enough resources to adequately respond to it. But generally speaking, the strategy that you need to apply for UC first. So if you can get through to somebody, I know a lot of people have had a lot of success by going through a local legislator, so a state legislator, either a state representative or a state senator, somebody who has, they all have what they call offices in there called constituency services. So there are people who work for the legislators whose job it is to kind of help out their residents with issues like that. If you can't get through to somebody at UC, but ultimately that's going to be the solution, is that PUA claim is probably causing the obstacle that's preventing that UC claim from being properly resolved. And until that UC claim is resolved, then the PUA can't be resolved. And if the end outcome may be that you do have to apply for PUA, like the worker may be right that PUA is more appropriate for them, but unemployment is requiring everybody to apply for UC first. And of course, you cannot receive both programs, benefits from both programs at the same time. That's, we're going to talk about overpayments a little bit later, but that's just going to create more problems for you than you possibly want to deal with. So last year, from I think it was April to July, if my memory is right, there was what I call a bump. And in addition to whatever the weekly benefit amount was, from the federal money, they were throwing on $600 extra a week last year. So for workers who qualified for unemployment or PUA, they were getting an additional $600 a week. That ended last July, I believe, if my memory's right. And then with the new, a lot of people call it CARES 2, there's actually a different term for it, but the new federal stimulus package that was passed here in the early spring, late winter, that included a $300 bump for people receiving PUA or UC. And that's going to run through September 4th of 2021. There's also, because I didn't mention this under traditional unemployment, but traditionally, unemployment compensation benefits only last, I shouldn't say only that, but they last for 26 weeks. That was the maximum amount that you get them. During the pandemic, some of the money that came from the federal government to the states was also to help fund extension programs to that 26 weeks. So there's a program called PEUC that extended programs out, but those extensions are going to end September 4th, 2021 as well. And the last I heard was that the state was saying that they don't anticipate that there's going to be any extensions or that $300 bump beyond that date. So September 4th. Now, you still can be eligible for traditional unemployment compensation benefits, even if you're affected by the pandemic. So let's say you were working at a job and then the business shut down. Now, I could see why, if you read newspaper articles from last year when they were talking about this stuff, you would assume, well, if I was a worker, I should have applied. I should apply for PUA. But really, it's UC that covers that as well. If you're a traditional worker, so you're somebody who draws a paycheck directly from the employer in exchange for the services that you provide. Even if your business was shut down due to the pandemic, or you were personally affected by the pandemic, and so you weren't able to work, or something along those lines, that's actually a UC case, not a PUA case in most instances. Now, PUA, we talked about this a little bit. So I think we talked about all this. I will say that there's two separate, if you access the department's website, there's two different portals that you use, one for PUA and then the old traditional one for UC. I'll also tell you that next week, I think it is, they're transitioning into some new software they're going to be using. So for all of you who've been using your trusty PIN number, they're going to be switching that system over. So the UC system is going to look more like the PUA system, as far as how you interface with it. But I haven't seen it yet either. But so there's going to be a week, I think it's next week, the first week in June, where you can't apply for benefits, but they will allow you to backdate it if you apply the week after that. And then during that week, folks who are currently collecting, they will not be able to file a biweekly claim during that week. But again, either you can do it before the department's allowing you to kind of retro or file your claim early, or you can go back afterwards and backdate your filings for your biweekly claims if you need to. One of the other improvements about the new system is that they're going to allow claimants to file weekly claims instead of biweekly claims. So you'll get money weekly if that's a better cycle for you. So that might be an improvement for some people. But it is something that you should be getting emails about that through your portals if you're somebody who's collecting benefits and staying on top of that. I will also say that as part of the more recent CARES Act installment, there was a requirement where they required people who were receiving benefits to upload identification papers and stuff about their to prove their work again. Like they had to start all over. So you should comply with those requests. They weren't too cumbersome. So if you were one of those people who was asked to supply information into your portal, I would encourage you to do that in a timely fashion, because otherwise they're likely going to cut you off. As far as PUA goes, who should apply this? We talked about this a little bit. Self-employed. If you're somebody who is seeking part-time work and you just can't find it because the pandemic, so like think restaurant industry, banquet services. I know that's what hit really hard. People who worked in a theater, those kind of jobs. If you lack sufficient work history, so if you're somebody who was kind of an independent contractor, you didn't have like a traditional work, and that's not what you were doing, you may qualify for PUA. And now this isn't going to affect a lot of people, but if you do exhaust your regular UC or extended benefits, then potentially you could qualify for PUA. But again, that's not going to affect many people because of all the extensions that have been added on to UC. Not a lot of folks are going to be affected by that. Who should not file for PUA? So if you're somebody who's retired, right, you don't have an attachment to the workforce, so you shouldn't be applying for PUA. If you weren't working before, you had no intention of working, again, that's not going to be, you're not going to qualify for PUA. Inmates, halfway house residents who are on lockdown, children who are not working. I don't think I hope all of you know that you shouldn't be using somebody else's name to try to get benefits. That's going to cause you big problems. College students who aren't interested in working should not be applying for PUA. If you're on Social Security disability and you're not actually working or you have no intention to work, you shouldn't be applying for PUA. Claimants who work as an employee should file UC. We talked about that. Landlords, they don't consider, while being a landlord is revenue generating, it's not employment. And in this sense, that would qualify you for PUA. Emily, any questions pop up?
Yeah, so we had a question kind of clarifying the earlier question. Let's see, if someone never got a PIN number from unemployment compensation, should specifically as somebody has filed both for PUA and UC, let me just read it.
Yeah.
I need to know if I should cancel both my PUA claim and UC claim to start over again correctly with UC first, or can the paperwork be mailed? Can I cancel and start over because UC has not given me a PIN number, so I can't do a weekly claim?
Yeah.
So what would your...
So, I mean, if that was somebody who I was dealing with, they came into my office, I would do a lot of this for them. And what I would do is I would reach out to somebody on unemployment. And that's my concern with all of this is you don't want to lose the date that you filed for application for benefits for one or the other. So, like, for instance, you don't want the Department of Labor and Industry to be able to say, well, today is May 27th. We recognize that you filed for PUA back in whenever it was, last year maybe. But because you're applying now, because those claims from last year weren't appropriate, we're only going to start paying you from May 27th moving forward. We're not going to go back to those previous dates. So I would work with the department in such a way to make sure that that was clearly the starting point on the claim was the old filing date. And that's my concern with, like, just canceling out, I guess, or deleting the old claims. I think you need to talk to somebody at the department. I know it's a pain, but that's why you need to have that conversation. You need to make sure that if they are going to make you file a new claim today, that it's backdated to when you first applied back whenever, I know it wasn't, you didn't know any better, but when you applied for both PUA first and then UC, you want to make sure that that's the date that they're starting with. And I would want that on my part to be confirmed before I went deleting anything, because so you want to work with somebody at UC. Now, whether that's through an attorney or through a legislator or on your own, that's a decision that you have to make. But I think that's going to be what you're going to want to do. And I'm hesitant to say that just go and cancel everything out, because then you might have to start over again, and you're going to lose out on potentially months of benefits that's owed to you, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Nick. Just going to try to keep calling the unemployment office. I think we do.
I know it's frustrating. I will share this with you from people who've been successful in getting through, is that they call first thing in the morning, and I know some people just leave their phone, hooked up to a charger and just let it on speakerphone until somebody picks up. Other people have had some luck if you have access to your internet access in using that chat feature that's on their website. And then there's also, you can email, is it claim something? There's right on their website, they have some email. So squeaky wheel gets the oil in this situation. So I would do all of that. I would be sending emails, chats, calling my legislator, because it's a pretty common problem. So it's resolvable. That's the good news. Like, people have applied for PUA first because they thought that was more appropriate for them, and then it creates an issue down the road, and then trying to undo that problem is something that the department knows how to do. You just need to you need to talk to somebody to make sure it's done correctly, so that you don't lose out on weeks that you should be getting paid for. That's the bottom line.
And then, Nick, we do have a couple of other questions, but I
Sure.
want to allow time for you to finish up your presentation, because we've got about 15 minutes left for our scheduled time this evening.
Okay. All right. get through this material here, I think.
Ely, we'll get to you soon, I promise. I promise.
Like when we talk about backdating, you can backdate. That means that, let's say, like when you do call the department today and you want to file a new application, but really you lost your job 2 or 3 months ago. They're being really lenient on that issue under non-pandemic times. They're usually not very lenient. There's some pretty strict rules that come into play, but right now they're being more lenient. So make sure you do take advantage of that if that applies to you. Ask for backdating. Ask for backdating if that applies to you. Referee hearings, we talked about this a little bit. All I'm going to mention is that they're being held by telephone right now. They're not in person. Under normal times, they are in person. And there's some quirks to the hearings being held by telephone. One of them is, for instance, if you do have documents that you want to be used as part of the hearing, those documents, copies of them, have to be submitted to the referee's office at least 5 days in advance of the hearing. You can't just, on the day of the hearing, say, oh, hey, referee, I have some information here that I have, emails, text messages, whatever the case may be. It's that the referee may not allow you to use it during the course of the hearing because you didn't submit at least 5 days early. And there's other rules like that. So if you do have a hearing, make sure you read the paperwork and be familiar with the protocols that are in place for telephone hearings. Overpayments they're popping up quite a bit because people are confused about what to do, and so they've made some missteps. Sometimes it's not really on purpose. It's just they're desperate. You can't get through to get any answers. They're looking online to try to find answers. They're talking to friends. Just mistakes are being made, and so the department has 2 ways they can classify an overpayment. So an overpayment is where somebody receives unemployment compensation benefits, but the department believes that they were not properly awarded for one reason or another. So if the department thinks, oh, this was just an honest mistake, they classify it as non-fault. And for non-fault overpayments, they will collect on the overpayment, but they're only going to collect from future benefits. So if you go on unemployment in essentially the next 3 years, they'll take up to 1/3 of your future benefits to collect towards and offset that overpayment. Now, if they think that you did something purposefully, so let's say you were fired, but you say that you quit, and that ends up leading to you being eligible for benefits, and later it comes out that you were indeed fired, and you even, like, let's say you got termination notice, or like you should have known you were fired, you just told a fib to unemployment, then that's going to be classified as a fault overpayment, and the department can collect on those more aggressively. They can do things like intercept your tax refunds. They can put liens against real property, and they can collect it for longer periods of time. There can be penalty weeks too that can be involved. So we're leery of that. Let me mention there's going to be an upcoming event on June 17th. Now, this is out of Chester County, but it's a virtual workshop. You use your point of contact and a telephone number. Anybody can sign up for this. It's going to be completely free. It's run through the Chester County. Chester County is out towards Philadelphia. It's the Chester County Career Link. And I think there's an attorney running that one as well. That's going to be a good source of information about all the new changes that are happening with unemployment, if that's of interest to you. I'm going to leave this up for just a couple more beats, just in case anybody wants to write down any of this information. June 17th from 2 to 3, Chester County. The telephone number is 610-429-9400, extension 4112. Or if you have a career link, I think it's going to be administered through a career link. So one way or another, you're going to either have to set up an account, or if you have an account, to participate in that event.